My name is Bruce Ledowitz, and I serve as a professor of law at Duquesne University School of Law. The occasion for this talk is a class in my course in the philosophy of law. The general topic is the breakdown of American public life. The occasion for this talk is actually my birthday. In Jewish tradition, a parent leaves a statement of wisdom to be read by the children after the parent dies. I'm no longer Jewish, I have become a secularist, but I see the value in this tradition. Since today is my 66th birthday, and since the breakdown in American public life is beyond doubt, this seemed the right time to record a statement offering my explanation of why my country is in the terrible state she is in and what could be done about it. The title explains my thesis. To cure American politics, there must be a reformation in secularism. But this seems strange for two reasons. First, secularism is not a religion. So how can the actions of Martin Luther in 1517 have anything to do with secularism, even as a model? And second, lots of people have ideas about why American public life is broken, from income inequality and sexism and racism on the left to the undermining of freedom, religion, and tradition on the right. And those reasons don't have anything to do with secularism as such. But contrary to all the problems in American life that people point to as the cause of the breakdown in politics, my claim is that the foundation of the breakdown is spiritual. We hate and distrust our political opponents, not just individual leaders of the other side, but basically the other side as a whole. We don't believe that the people we disagree with have the best interests of America at heart. It is easy to demonstrate our mutual hatreds. Just think of how the left demonized the wealthy who fund attacks on unions, or the NRA, or people who watch Fox News. Conversely, think how the right demonizes the Black Lives Matter movement. Think of the instant cavalier dismissal of the students in Florida after the school shooting, or the opinions about President Obama. Was he really the biggest liar who was ever president, if he was even an American citizen? We believe we are the true Americans, and those other people are not. This is sometimes called tribal thinking. As Amy Chua argues in her new book, Political Tribes, this kind of us-them thinking is killing us. Now, I am not going to debunk this tribal thinking in any detail. It is nonsense. I have friends who voted for President Trump and who watch Fox News, and so I know that while I believe they are mistaken in many of their views, they very much have the good of America at heart. And they believe that the policies that I favor would hurt America. They are sincere, well-informed, and intelligent. The biases of the left in these regards are just that, biases. And I myself, a member of the left in more or less good standing, am also sincere, well-informed, and intelligent. I know that the biases of the right are also just that, biases. Individuals, especially politicians, may indeed be dishonest in their public expressions. But our opponents in general, the other side, are not dishonest and are not manipulated. Our tribal thinking is false. But the fact that it is false does not matter. We will not be convinced. What Amy Chua cannot explain is why we have descended into this tribalism. We were not quite this way before. Ronald Reagan did not hate and distrust Tip O'Neill. Our distrust of our fellow Americans is a spiritual crisis, a religious disease, a sickness in our national consciousness. It is of a piece with the opioid epidemic and school shootings and declining life expectancy and a general feeling of decline in America. These are not rational reactions to actual experience or empirical conditions. The foundation of what Jimmy Carter once called our national malaise lies elsewhere. It does not have a material cause. As Paul Ryan once said, some Americans have lost their will to make the most of their lives. Now, Ryan would say that Americans are this way because there's too much welfare available. This is a silly claim, since welfare and aid to families with dependent children, indeed the whole safety net, was radically cut back in the 1990s. Nevertheless, Ryan is right about a crisis in values. He is wrong about the source. The spiritual crisis in America has its roots in the death of God, announced by Friedrich Nietzsche in The Gay Science in 1882. The death of God did not mean that God had ceased to exist or that there were no longer religious believers. The death of God meant that there was no longer any guarantee that the universe has a point. No reason to think that our lives have any meaning. As the evolutionary scientist Richard Dawkins once put it, the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. In other words, when God died, the trustworthy universe died as well. Nietzsche knew that the death of God would have a monumental effect on human consciousness, and he was not certain that the effect would be positive. That is why he also said it would take 1,000 years to bury God. Well, only 136 years have gone by so far, and we are now in the midst of the crisis of nihilism that Nietzsche foresaw. Now, why would the death of God manifest in the form of the current breakdown in American political life? Why would the death of God lead so many of us to hate and distrust each other? As Nietzsche understood, in the absence of God, or some other trustworthy ground of reality, there is only the will to power. The will to power becomes the real. Our politics today perfectly reflect that. There is only winning as the goal, not truth, because there is no binding truth. Another way to think about this is that when people think of right and wrong as objective and human flourishing as an attainable goal, then there is the possibility of persuading my opponents to agree with me. In principle, we all want the same thing and just disagree about how to get there. But if instead all values are subjective, all we can do is fight. It's your will to power versus my will to power. The death of God is demoralizing for some people. These are the people Ryan is describing. But it is energizing, though destructive, for others. Those others tend to live in public life. That distinction is what William Butler Yeats saw in his post-World War I poem, The Second Coming. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. If I am right about the death of God and its effect on politics, what is the solution for American public life? Religious believers will be tempted to say, "I told you so." We should all become religious again. But recognizing the harm the death of God brings does not bring God back. For now, health for the culture will not come from the traditional religions. That cultural ship has sailed for now. That leaves secularism. That is, secularists like myself as the source of renewal. And that is why I am addressing the need in secularism for a reformation. A reformation is needed because of an error in secularism. Secularists have told themselves that Nietzsche was wrong, that the death of God was not a catastrophe and did not need any kind of response. That is why Greg Epstein could write his well-intentioned but completely superficial bestseller, Good Without God, about how well secularists are doing. He just does not see and secularists in general don't see the damage the death of God has caused. Actually, Nietzsche later had a similar view, at least in part. Nietzsche eventually came to the conclusion that for the elite, for aspiring Übermenschen, supermen, humans could live creatively, taking responsibility for their own values, revaluing values. Some of us humans could make our own meaning. I believe the data is in about that project, and nihilism is winning. It turns out that human beings are incapable of forging ahead in the midst of the nothing. We need to know, as the philosopher Bernard Lonergan wrote, that we are not fools, and that the universe is on our side as we strive for the good, the true, and the beautiful. Without that certainty, we cannot go on. We can see that now. The death of God undid that certainty, and that is the damage that secularists cannot see, but must begin to see. Instead of debunking the human need for a caring universe, we secularists need to take a second look at it as the beginning of a new and natural source of meaning, a cure for nihilism. In the book City of God, the novelist E.L. Doctorow describes the essence of the human through the words of a liberal rabbi, Sarah Blumenthal, who says of us humans, "We pursue a teleology thus far that has given us only the one substantive indication of itself, that we as human beings live in moral consequence." Humans are born to live with the understanding that what we do is ultimately significant. All human beings are born to live that way. Secular opinion currently says that this human sense of significance is an illusion. Great scientists say it, Richard Dawkins above, with his Indifferent Universe. Even the great cultural icon Neil deGrasse Tyson said it on the Cosmos series in 2014. Of course, Chris Hitchens and all the new atheists said it. As the late great philosopher Hilary Putnam explained in a criticism, it is a kind of badge of honor among positivists to point out how foolish we are to believe we are special and that our lives matter in some ultimate sense. These secularists have succeeded to some extent. The materialists, the nihilists, the relativists have succeeded in infecting American culture with the thought that there is not any great truth to pursue in our lives. There isn't any objective meaning. We can do with our lives what we want. As the headline of a column last July in the New York Times put it, "The universe doesn't care about your purpose." To be fair, this drumbeat of argued insignificance is pursued for what its proponents believe is a good end. We learn in the last episode of the Cosmos series just why Tyson is so anxious to claim that humans are not of special significance to the universe. In that last episode, Tyson reframed Carl Sagan's famous pale blue dot monologue from the first Cosmos series in 1978. Sagan asked NASA to take one last picture of Earth as the Voyager 1 spacecraft passed Neptune. Then, in the original Cosmos series, and repeated in the last episode of the new series, the viewer watches as Earth fades to what Sagan calls the pale blue dot. The following is part of Sagan's original commentary, played anew as we watch. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. In other words, when Sagan says that humans are not special, he is hoping that human evil will thereby be lessened. Sagan believed that humans kill each other because we think God loves some of us specially. I admit it looks that way sometimes. People have killed each other in religious battles over the Word of God, and individuals still do so. But since the beginning of the 20th century, the bloodiest in human history in terms of killing, large-scale conflict has been about rival groups, nationalisms, in which religion may or may not be a factor. Power is at stake, not dogma. I think humans kill each other primarily because of our fear that we are nothing. Nietzsche shared Sagan's and Tyson's view that we are not special. Sagan's pale blue dot is not an antidote to nihilism, it is its birthplace. Sagan must never have read how Nietzsche also described our cosmic insignificance. If he had, Sagan would have experienced a deep, disturbing chill. Sagan would have heard his own words with a far different resonance. Here is Nietzsche's pale blue dot. In some remote corner of the universe, poured out and glittering in innumerable solar systems, there once was a star on which clever animals invented knowledge. That was the highest and most mendacious minute of world history, yet only a minute. After nature had drawn a few breaths, the star grew cold, and the clever animals had to die. If humans come to believe that we are insignificant, the result is not that we come to care for each other, but that we come to hate each other. It is the cry against the threat of insignificance that is informing our politics today. That is why we hate each other. We no longer have a shared account of a universe that makes sense to us. There is no longer a God who loves us, who keeps us safe, and who will see to it that reality is ultimately kind. Now, if I thought that the nihilists were right, and that we human beings are deluded that we are important, then I would agree that we should know about it. Just because this knowledge makes us sick and poisons our politics doesn't make the knowledge false. But I believe this claim of insignificance is false. That is what I mean by taking a second look. Take a small example. Martin Luther King Jr. used to say, quoting Theodore Parker, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Recently, echoing the theme of illusion, insignificance, and meaninglessness, Rich Cohen wrote in response in the magazine Vanity Fair, "No, it doesn't." But now wait a minute. Granted, there cannot be any proof about a matter like this, but aren't there lots of indicators that Martin Luther King Jr. was right? We have actually gone from slavery to a limited liberation, from Jim Crow with its lynchings, lawlessness, and de jure segregation to a President Barack Obama. We have gone from pretty constant police violence to the Black Lives Matter movement. All of this is undeniable progress on the intractable front of racism. There is no reason to deny that this is all real progress toward justice. That acknowledgement does not lessen in the slightest the need to continue or the continuing injustices. But it does sound like the slow bending toward justice that King was pointing to. And it certainly does not vindicate the hopelessness of a Rich Cohen. And isn't the human sense of significance absolutely necessary? Tyson himself admitted in the Cosmos series that it is this sense that makes science possible. Humans pursue science, Tyson said, because it matters what's true. But how could it matter unless the actions of humans could have real significance? Not just significance we make up, but real significance. From a purely natural perspective, it is fair to ask why humans developed our sense of significance in the first place. Why do we so strongly tend to live in moral consequence, so that not doing so makes us and our culture sick? After all, If the universe is cold and indifferent, why don't we know it? Why don't we sense it? Why is it more natural for us to believe that the universe is on our side and cares what we do? I have read people speculate that the human sense of significance had survival value, and that is why we have it. I suppose that must be true, in a sense. Human beings who did not believe in gravity would not have lasted long enough to mate. But then it is fair to ask, why does a sense of significance have survival value? After all, most illusions do not. Maybe this sense of ourselves has survival value because it is true. The universe has meaning and is not simply a collection of forces, and we are a crucial part of that significance. There is plenty of evidence in nature that the universe is on our side. The Big Bang shows us there is a tendency toward being. The early galaxies show us there is a tendency toward order. Life shows us there is a tendency in matter toward self-organization. Consciousness shows us there is a tendency toward intellect. Evolution shows us that with higher intellect, there is a tendency toward tenderness, generosity, and care. We ourselves, our nature, human nature, is evidence of a meaningful universe. Why is it that we evolved to be what we are, curious beings capable of love? Sure, these traits have survival value, but maybe they have survival value because they express the truth of things. It really is better to love than to hate, better to live generously rather than meanly, better to be tender rather than callous. It's not just that you'll have more children that way. The universe is built that way. I am not trying to prove all this here. I'm trying to reopen a question for secularism, the question of meaning. The following description is enough for now. Human society is sick. American society is sick. Its sickness manifests in distrust and mutual hatred. So far, all efforts to dispel this condition have failed. The root of this condition is a belief, the belief that the universe is without meaning. It is that belief that has made us sick. That belief is not self-evident and might be false. If it is false, then cultural regeneration is not only possible, but likely. Our next step is therefore obvious. We must really engage this question of meaning. We must engage the question of human destiny, and that is what I mean by a reformation in secularism. Secularism must come clean about its current beliefs and then must be open to real investigation of the nature of reality, including human nature. We might discover that we secularists have more in common with the traditional religions than we had thought. They might be right about objective truth. We have drifted to where we are today. And since we have drifted into a very bad place, it is sensible to stop drifting and start actually paddling. Only then can we discover whether there might be some destination that we could paddle toward. And we are waking up. Just a few years ago, it was fashionable to proclaim that there was no truth. This was the heyday of postmodernism, neocolonialism, and relativism. But once President Trump was elected and Time magazine asked whether truth was dead, it was no longer fashionable. Suddenly, the same people who thought relativism in all things was sophisticated started talking again about truth. But they lacked the proper vocabulary of truth because they themselves had trashed it. And they thought you could defend truth in the facts without having to talk about values. Though beyond my focus here, Hilary Putnam has shown that there is no truth of facts without truth of values. The same phenomenon has occurred with regard to the common good in politics. Years ago, at the height of the new atheism, Mark Lila wrote a book, The Stillborn God, that argued for a very restrained conception of political life. Only freedom for the individual. Anything else, he said, was disguised religion. But now, with the rise of identity politics, Leela is singing a different tune. Now in the book, The Once and Future Liberal, he argues that liberals must pursue our common interests rather than emphasizing our differences in identity politics. But again, Leela cannot really do this because he has no wherewithal to discuss a good life for people. That would require the kind of commitment to essence and objective value that he has spent his entire life criticizing. Another example is faith. Whereas a Sam Harris could write a book in 2004 called The End of Faith, arguing against religion, we now see that truth itself depends on faith. I must trust the climate experts, for example, if the truth of global warming is to be known. Because of people like Harris, it is easy to distrust science and all other expertise. But again, faith requires a commitment to truth. So while we are awakening to the danger, we don't yet know how to structure the investigation. You can't just proclaim the good, the true, and the beautiful any more than you can just go back to God. The world of classical metaphysics collapsed for a reason. Truth needs a new foundation. The foundation of the rediscovery of meaning and truth will be the nature of the universe itself. That destination still lies only in our future, however. For now, it will be enough to reopen the question of truth in the culture. We must actively pursue the question whether the universe is meaningless or not. Granted, this is not a simple investigation. A lot depends on the attitude with which one begins to look, but it is not just a matter of opinion either. This investigation would lead to a new role for our universities, including our law schools. The university should be a place where the nature of the universe is explored, not just its physical, but its spiritual promise. And that includes addressing whether history shows a direction toward justice or not. In other words, we need a normative investigation of reality, of the kind that elite opinion thought we had left behind with Aristotle. It turns out that the telos of reality is a question humans cannot leave behind. As for law schools, they must become, as Roberto Unger urged in a different context, the place where the institutions that promote human flourishing are investigated. That again requires answering the question of human flourishing itself. Is there a way that humans are designed to live? If so, some institutions will be better at promoting that than others. There is a great deal to be done, and a great deal of promise in doing it. Even turning in the direction of these tasks will promote healing in our public life. This reformation of secularism holds the promise of health for the body politic. In this reformation of secularism lies the potential cure for American politics. Thank you.